Great. And whenever you get a second, if you can also share the slides. I'm going to try and run through this reasonably quickly, but please feel free to tell me to slow down as necessary. Okay, so just wanted to start by grounding us in some of P4P's core beliefs, which are that all social work students must be paid for their fieldwork. The University of Michigan School of Social Work can help lead the way in this, and that P4P wants to work with the University of Michigan to make this happen. Through a joint task force, P4P has been working together with the University School of Social Work Administration on these issues, and we look forward to continuing to work with administration, potentially through a field committee in the future. We also appreciate the dedication of faculty and staff in working with us to end the injustices inherent in our current educational system. We want to go on to the next slide. So as you can see, this is a table of the current costs of the MSW program at the University of Michigan. This is for residents. I won't spend too much time again, but we can share this data later if people are interested. We can see at the bottom it totals just under $30,000 to complete the program for residents. If we move on to the next slide, we can see a similar breakdown for non-resident students completing the program, which is just under 10,000 more to complete. So just to give us a sense, I know most of the people here will have completed the MSW at some point, but for those of us who it might have been a few years, this is what the current reality looks like for students. If we can go on to the next slide. These are similarly some research that's been undergone that shows 88% of our students are not paid for their fieldwork, which is obviously the vast majority. And also 83% of student responders to our research stated that they have a job or other source of employment outside of and in addition to fieldwork while they're completing the program. Next slide. And this is a comparison of the MSW. You can see all the way on the left, the breakdown of statistics on that, compared to the Masters of Public Health and Masters of Public Policy degrees at the university. And we can see the hours required and the funding in particular are very disparate. Again, I won't go through all of these numbers because you can see on your screen, but yeah, and then it's very stark when it's broken down like this, right? We can see, you know, there really is a difference between social work and other programs doing comparable work. We can go on to the next slide. So to start, P4P is not asking field sites to take on the burden of paying these students. While we think it's incredibly important that students get paid, we understand that much of the time, field sites are not in a position to pay students. They are similarly under-resourced, similarly struggling for funds, and getting that out in the open right at the outset is important to us. P4P is not asking field sites to be the ones to pay their students unless they are so financially secure that they feel comfortable volunteering to take that initiative. If we can go on to the next slide. So what P4P is asking field sites to do is support us in pursuing more funding from the university, from the state, from federal sources, from other funding sources to support us in getting more funding for students and for field sites. Because again, we understand this is a shared issue, these are shared barriers, and in many ways we're in similar positions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through this again kind of quickly, but please feel free to ask clarifying questions. So our proposed plan to start addressing some of these issues is that all students enrolled in field will receive a stipend for their field work from the University of Michigan. We're proposing that that would be paid out in biweekly increments, and the size of that biweekly payout would depend on the number of field hours that that student is doing per semester. So as an example, students in 24 hours of field per week will earn 1.5 times more than those in 16 hours of field per week. That accounts for the different tracks and the different schedules within the program. This plan resembles the stipend programs for the law and public policy students at the university who choose to take their degree-required internships at firms who cannot afford to pay them. Because again, there are similar issues with funding across the board. One key difference in our proposal is that our stipend funds would primarily come from the university endowment, not the School of Social Work. Because again, that's been a concern that, we're just taking money from areas that don't have the money. So we would not be taking from the School of Social Work specifically, but rather the university's larger endowment. We also understand that most Master of Public Policy and Master of Public Health stipend funds come from those schools' endowment funds, respectively, and that the School of Social Work uniquely cannot rely on its own endowment because we have essentially a much smaller number of wealthy alumni who donate, because again, this is a field-wide issue of lack of funding. If we can go on to the next slide. So continuing with the plan, field sites are not the payers of first resort. So we encourage sites to consider if their organization structure allows for some amount of payment. If you have the funds, you are more than welcome to contribute towards your students, but again, we are not looking to field sites to be the primary funders. If a field site does already pay its interns, it can continue doing so as long as the stipend that it's offering is at least the amount that the university would provide. If the amount is less, then the university would supplement the field site's contribution to make sure, again, all students are getting an equitable amount that isn't determined by their field site's ability to pay. The amount of the stipend paid to the students during a given calendar year will be added to the scholarships and grants section of their IRS form 1098T. Since the stipend is not being used to pay for qualified educational expenses, it would need to be reported using the IRS form 8863. And we are proposing an amount of $20 per hour as a reasonable rate. We can go on to the next slide, please. So some further details about funding. The stipend should be paid by drawing from the U of M's $5.7 billion in unrestricted endowment funds. So the U of M's endowment is actually much larger than that, but $5.7 billion is completely unrestricted funds that we could draw from if approved. This would involve creating a new line item in the School of Social Work budget, not by cutting current financial aid allocation or other programs. So again, our primary goal is getting more funding. We would not be taking from an already too small amount of money to fund in different ways. We would be trying to get additional funding. Other options include creating apprenticeship programs with major field sites, state legislation to create funding, and pursuing School of Social Work alum donations. And P4P continues to pursue all of these options, but believes that endowment funding is the best choice right now. We can go on to the next slide. So P4P and field sites. We can do one more slide, please. Thank you. So the ethics of not paying students. Requiring students to work 16 to 24 hours for free per week creates an unnecessary financial barrier that prevent low social economic status people who are disproportionately likely to be people of color, from joining the social work profession. This is something we see reflected in our day-to-day work. This is something we see in the organizations that we serve at. This is a reality of our field. Unpaid fieldwork contributes to the nationwide shortage of behavioral health professionals, depriving already underserved clients of high-quality services. Again, this is a reality that we're probably all very familiar with. Unpaid labor and low salaries are expected in helping professions, care professions, care labor, different terms for the same thing, fields that are predominantly female. Paying students for fieldwork reduces rates of burnout, leading to better client outcomes in the immediate and longer term. And making an MSW more accessible will go a long way towards addressing nationwide social worker shortages. If we're removing those barriers, if we're reducing the difficulty in obtaining this degree, that will go a long way in helping to get social workers out there in the world. Next slide, please. So P4P, like I mentioned before, sees MSW students and MSW field sites as very much sharing a lot of the same barriers and a lot of the same struggles. We see field students and field sites as sharing many of these barriers and suffering from a similar lack of resources, chief amongst them financial resources. We also know that not being able to meet basic needs is not something that you can just leave at home when you go to work in the morning or the evening or whenever you're going to work. For MSW students, the stresses of not being able to afford food or of not sleeping enough or of constantly worrying about how you're going to balance a full-time grad program and working so you can afford that program, those stresses add up. They are with us when we're in class. They're with us when we serve clients, and they're with us as we support our field site organizations. We know that many of the people on this call will remember these days and will have had their own experiences of really struggling to make it through a program that they deeply cared about. P4P is here to challenge the claim that we should have to endure these circumstances to be professionals in this field. We don't agree that suffering is the way. We don't agree that suffering in this way, is what will make us good social workers. By removing these unnecessary barriers to an MSW, we are supporting social workers and we're strengthening our field as a whole. Next slide, please. So, asking kind of a touchy question at the top there, but I think it's something that we've all wondered at some point or another. And one thing that we think is that unpaid fieldwork socializes students into accepting unsustainably low pay rates after graduation. We're starting this mindset when we're in school. This is surely part of the reason why social work is one of the lowest paid professions that require a graduate degree. Paid fieldwork will encourage higher pay rates across the social work field and empower social workers to organize for better pay and working conditions in their workplaces. Not only do field sites suffer from their own insufficient funding, they rely on field students who are pouring from an empty cup themselves. The species claims that being a social worker means sacrificing your own needs is harmful, and it upholds white supremacist and colonialist themes of charity and martyrdom as the only levers of change. This idea is also actively damaging to the stability of this field. Social workers who begin their careers burnt out and overstretched are not people who will have the capacity to continue working towards real change. Our code of ethics promotes service and competence. Yes, those are values that we agree on and work to uphold. Our code of ethics also promotes values of social justice, dignity and worth of the person, and importance of human relationships and integrity. We think those should be, sorry, not sure if you can hear that. We think that those should be upheld as well. Churning through social workers in an endless cycle of burnout not only goes against our code of ethics, but does endless damage to everyone impacted by the field of social work. If we had to go through a process that caused us harm, it is our responsibility to try and change it for others in the future. It is a mistake to think that just because we all made it through this process, others should not. Others should then be subjected to it. We have the choice to make this field better, or to enshrine within it the glorification of suffering and self-sacrifice, rather than the care and dignity and worth of the person that we hold as our own deeply held values and as explicit parts of our code of ethics. That is my last slide. If we go one more, I think there's a little bit of info on how you can follow us on social media. But I will pass it over to Laura from Emergence Collective, and I know they have some things to share as well.
Thank you, Cleo. Wow, hearing you talk about all these definitely brought me back to, my student days and how I felt and reflected on our field placements since. But thank you for having us. My name is Laura Tiga Fuentes. I'm with Emergence Collective. We're a women-owned evaluation consulting firm. We operate on a flat structure, meaning that we all share decision making. So we are a field placement site, and our students are involved in all of our discussions, and they get to vote too. And they are, we really take their input and feedback equally, just as all of our team members. So that's a little bit about just our business model and how it kind of plays into our approach as well. My colleague Lauren is also here, and so she will be jumping in as well. I'm going to give a little bit of background on our experience with field placements, and then talk about why we pay our field students, and then how. So we have had students as a field placement site since I think 2018. So we've had 4 students. Mary Matson is our colleague. She's our field supervisor. And not only is she the field supervisor, but she's also serves on the field site subcommittee and has been part of the joint task force on stipends. So we're pretty embedded in advocating for this work. We also have 6 team members, and 5 of them have actually graduated from the MSW program at the University of Michigan. So we have a lot of experience as students and also as field placement sites. I also was a field placement supervisor for about 6 years in a different position in Washtenaw County. So we definitely have a lot of perspectives. So I just wanted to kind of share that background. But I think why we pay, we think about this in terms of it being an equity issue, and a lot of the barriers that you talked about, Cleo, is something that we reflect on a daily basis. So for example, I think it's worth just noting them again, that we know our students are, they have school responsibilities, they have field responsibilities, and that might not give them the opportunity to have a job on top of that. I mean, they're already busy, but having an income supporting them during grad school is unlikely for a lot of students. And that means that the field placement could be adding to, how they're accruing debt over time, right? And so we definitely do not want to be that kind of burden on students as a field placement site. So we think about that, and on top of not being able to probably find another source of income, we know that transportation is a cost, maybe clothes for, adhering to a certain dress code, for example, could be cost. So there's a cost associated with it. So we definitely don't want to impact their already stressful, busy lives in that way. But we're also very aware of how our company benefits. So we benefit because they contribute amazing work that we use with our partners, and that contributes to our revenue that we receive as a company, right? We also know that we are having cost savings on the projects that they're serving on. So we're very aware that we're gaining, we're benefiting. We want our students to benefit as well. So yes, we're very committed to providing them a great experience educationally, where they're gaining applicable skills that will build on their career, so committed to that, but also we want to make sure that they feel valued, because we do value them so much. Like I said, they're part of our, if we have a company retreat, they're part of it, and their say and their voting is as much integrated as it is with all our team members. So we really do value them and see them as equal partners. So, the other thing I don't want to forget to say is that we value their perspective. Students bring a very fresh perspective outside of our company. So when we're talking about equity issues, when we're talking about planning, when we're talking about our business model, we love hearing from them. So we benefit in that way as well. So that is a little bit about why we think it's important to contribute to the field. I think, Cleo, when you were talking about just our field in general and how it would benefit in the long term by everybody getting paid more and being valued as a profession, I think that I think about that a lot too. So hopefully we're contributing to that in terms of building our field as well. How we do it, I know that there's a lot of ways and a lot of factors to think about when field sites are setting this up. Maybe their HR is set up differently, there's legal language, but so there's a lot of vagueness, but I think the most important thing is to recognize is that it's an educational experience. It's not considered employment. So we compensate students with an educational stipend. I believe it's given twice a semester. But we definitely, in terms of framing, we definitely refer to students as graduate students. We don't talk about them being interns or being employees, right? We call it what it is, and we want to be like straightforward about that as well. In terms of how we calculated our stipends, we're happy to talk individually about that. I'm actually going to put in the chat we just wrote a blog about this really recently. And so we want to share it just because it goes a little bit into more about how we frame it, why we do it, because I know we can't take up all the time here. So in terms of thinking more about it, if you want to talk more individually and have more discussions, we're always happy to chat and think about it. I think one thing that we do kind of as a business is we just try things, like we want to make sure that we're not stuck in like finding the perfect way and the perfect method and the most equitable, because we know that we can always build on it and change it and pivot as we're learning more. So this is always in our discussion, is this the most equitable way? Are students benefiting? What is the feedback that we're hearing? What are we learning out there? This, obviously this effort, we've been talking a lot about it just by being involved and just by being allies of the effort. So we're always looking to learn and pivot. So I just encourage any field sites that are thinking about it, that even if they don't feel like this is the perfect way to do it, to not get stuck in that and to just go for it. And then you can always like adapt as we go. I think that we're really excited and encouraged by all of this discussion and the support that we're seeing to both organizations and students. I think Cleo mentioned that the barriers exist for students and for the field sites. So we definitely don't want to be ignoring that side of things. We've made space for it in our budget and we were able to do that. And I think we're very fortunate to be able to do that. We recognize that not all organizations are going to be in that place. So we definitely want to acknowledge that our approach is not like a one size fits all, obviously, but we want to start thinking about as a profession, like how are students and field sites both supported so that there's success and not like a time burden on both ends, right? Like if students don't have as much professional experience as others, that doesn't mean that the field site needs to spend all of their time trying to get the student there. That could be supported in different ways. So just thinking, what is the support that can be provided and who provides it and who's responsible? I think those are important conversations. But Lauren, do you want to add anything? I know I went over this really quickly because I know you want to have other discussions.
I think it was
But
great, Laura. I think, yeah, I think that emphasizing that we do build it in, right? So when we're applying for a proposal, it's just baked into what our revenue goals are for the year. And so then year after year, we have that cash flow to be able to continue to fund these positions. And then for transparency, you sent in the chat the current rate that we use for the educational stipends. I don't have anything else to add. I thought that was great, Laura, but I'm here if folks have questions.
same, feel free to reach out to us. We'll put our email in the chat as well. And you have our blog and that has our contact information as well. But yeah, happy to answer any questions or chat individually at a different time.
Hi, Laura, I have a question. I'm wondering, has there been any pushback from any of the field site organizations? I'm just thinking about that there are some organizations where maybe there are staff that are making less than $20 an hour. Has there been any pushback about that maybe that students are making more than some people that are on staff?
You know, Lauren, I don't know if you've been around much longer than I have with the Mergers Collective. Have you heard that at all?
Well, no, not our team, because there isn't anyone in our organization who's paid
Right.
less than that. But I wonder if that's something that students encountered I don't know if the organizing team has any responses of things they've encountered that in the organization.
Yeah, curious about that as well.
Yeah, and thank you both so much. I just wanted to, it's so valuable to have a field site perspective and to hear that other side of it. Because again, yeah, I personally, and I think P4P as a whole definitely understands that, you know, we're all dealing with many of the same field-wide issues, field as in the field of social work, not as in field placements, but just wanted to say that. And I also wanted to, let me respond to what you said first. I think there is definitely resistance to paying people more and paying some people more when you're not paying other people more, and this tension between we all feel like we should be paid a bit more. Like social work is not as a whole a well-paying profession, and I think there is a lot of tension in how do we move this forward together, rather than some folks feeling like they're left behind. Right now, I think we're hoping that rather than producing that outcome, we would be encouraging people to treat full-time employees better as well, or part-time or more permanent, or however the framework of the organization is, but rather than viewing it as privileging students over employees, I think we're definitely looking at improving the field of social work as a whole. So ultimately, everyone in the field is ending up in a better place. I'm not sure if anyone else has thoughts on that.
I can hop in. Hi, everyone. I'm Ari. You probably got an email from me this week. I would also just say, you know, we uphold $20 an hour because we believe that, you know, students' work and all social workers' work is worth that. But at the same time, you know, if you are in a place where you want to start up a funding stream, I think we would also just recommend talking with students directly as well, who you're working with, and negotiating with them directly, just in the spirit of self-determination and empowerment, you know, because I think while $20 an hour is our gold standard, I don't think any of us would say that you should not pay students at all, period, if that's not going to be an opportunity for you. And that sort of, just like what Emergence Collective was saying, I think just starting up this process is progress. So that's all.
Yeah, bringing it back to something that Laura had said earlier, and echoing what Ari just said now, you know, there's that quote about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think that's definitely something that, you know, anyone who's tried to work towards better has felt at one point or another. And that's also something that I know I myself have been guilty of, is looking at all the things that could potentially be better rather than looking at, this could be a big step. And I see Matt is raising his hand, so I will pass it to Matt.
Thank you, Cleo. Hi, everyone. Matt, he, him. I'm also a member of U of M P4P. One other detail I want to add is that P4P is looking at the issue, as Cleo and Ari and others have mentioned, holistically throughout the entire profession. And we feel that our responsibility to the social work profession does not end with our current student body. So among other things, we're engaged with social work advocacy groups like the Social Service Workers United, or SWU, of Southeast Michigan, as well as their chapter in Chicago, and the Social Work Equity Campaign, or SWEC. These are organizations which, among other things, are pushing for better rates of pay and working conditions for social workers in all sorts of settings at all sorts of stages in their career.
Good info there, and I also wanted to highlight a really useful resource that Lauren dropped in the chat as well. But now we've kind of already transitioned to it, but I just wanted to formally mark we are now just open to discussion. So anyone who has questions or thoughts generally, again, please feel free to raise your hand. And questions for P4P, questions for Emergence Collective, thoughts generally. Let's hear it.
I will just say thank you for the efforts and the advocacy. I think this is very exciting to see this coming forward right now. As an alum of the program and someone who put myself through undergrad and grad school, it was really hard to work in my grad program, and I worked 2 jobs in undergrad. So it was a struggle. This is my career. I wanted to put everything in. And, I'm 11 years into CMH work, and the implications, as you mentioned, for how we're priming and setting people up for success and longevity, and the impact of that starting with placement. So I just wanted to say thank you. I am a field instructor as well in community mental health, and there are challenges I saw on the forum expressed with resources, but I feel like it's worth coming together to make it happen. So I will be following along and just really appreciate, this excites me about the field. So thank you for all the efforts, and I'm a fan, and I'm going to continue to support in whatever way I can. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. That's amazing to hear. We really appreciate you being here, and also really appreciate you sharing that perspective. Because again, I think it's something that a lot of us have experienced, or a lot of us have at least tangentially heard about, because it's a huge issue in this program. And that's something, we didn't mention it in this presentation, but P4P is a national movement. We have, I believe, 16 official chapters, and more considering it, more kind of figuring out their process across the country, which is incredible. It's incredible to be involved in, but it's a really bittersweet thing, because it tells us that this is a nationwide issue, that this is a huge issue, and that it affects so many of us. And Ari is telling me it is soon to be 20 chapters, and I am behind on the info, but that's incredible. Sorry, that was very exciting for me. But yes, anyone else with comments or thoughts or questions?
Hi, I have a quick question. Have you all captured any demographic data from students, in particular, on who is in support of this movement? Recognizing, I think, just looking through the Instagram page and even in the speakers, I don't know if all identities, specifically racial identities, have been represented in this conversation today.
Yes. we have done some research on our program specifically, but it is far from finished, far from entirely all-encompassing. I will say our program is definitely not as racially diverse as would be representative of the world at large, the state at large, but B, the people we serve, absolutely. And I think that is something that is borne out by the research that we've conducted. I'm wondering actually if someone else would be able to find some of our data right now to share. But yes, I think I see Elise is unmuted.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm Elise. I'm a current student and part of the leadership for P4P as well. I will say that when our first initial survey or petition went out in the very beginning of this, we had definitely a majority of the student body signed on, so that we know that this is something that the vast majority of our peers are in support of, in some capacity. There's always going to be different opinions about the best way to go about things, but we've continued to try to include as many voices as possible. With the original petition having over 325 signatures on it, we have continued to try and bring opportunities for those voices to come back to the table and add their ideas and beliefs. We've hosted a number of type of like town halls or like the future of P4P meetings to allow for that. But we also realize that like participating in these types of things is challenging for many students because they're already overstretched. They don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to add this on top of it. So we realize that, we're adding extra work and extra expectations for students as well. So we do the best we can to balance that. And ultimately, you're correct that not all representation is here today, but we do try to do our best as a movement in general to have equal representation or as close to equal representation as we can muster. I hope that answers that a little.
I would love to also just jump in. A common story I've heard about students generally is a lot of students don't do any extracurriculars because they simply are working 2 jobs and maybe commuting an hour to field 3 times a week. So there's actually some narratives from our walkout in March of students talking about dropping their extracurriculars and things like that, and payment for placements. We are advocating for the increase of leisure time for our students so that we can have more people participating in whatever activities they would like and can. But I will share our YouTube page that has some student speeches in case you are interested.
And I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that up, Felicia, because it is something that we have to be constantly on, and we have to constantly be striving for better on, because like Lisa said, that, the people who might need their voices heard the most are often the people who don't have the time or energy or capacity to be constantly struggling to be heard. And that's something that we should be very aware of. Let's see, Lindsay,
Sure. First of all, just thank you. This is super interesting. Elise had already kind of given us a similar presentation. So thank you, Elise. I guess I'm curious. So it's sounding like right now kind of the ask is, the main ask is for this to come from the endowment, right? And I understand that. And then it's also like, and if someone can find funding another way, then that could happen as well with money supplemented from the endowment, stuff like that. I know one thing we've been working on in Detroit is more paid internships for not just social work students, but students as a whole, or people who are not in school, but just getting the opportunity for paid internships. Right now, that only extends to Detroit residents ages 14 to 24, as far as what we've been able to find as far as funding. but I guess sometimes I get worried so it's sounding like what could happen is a last dollar model. And I do sometimes worry that when we have last dollar models, people work themselves like incredibly hard to find the internships, right? So we see it all the time. Like in Detroit, we have the Detroit Promise, which is a last dollar scholarship. And then students end up like, they're like, oh, well, you didn't apply for this scholarship, or you didn't try this, or you didn't try this, and finding different ways to try to get out of paying. And so I guess I'm just curious if there's kind of because I think it's realistic to have this, like, I hope that, field placements can pay, or, I know there's some legislation going on right now around school social workers and that kind of stuff. But then when it comes to last dollar funding, sometimes it's people get left out just because they haven't like worked themselves to the bone to get every other opportunity they can. And so I'm curious how you all are thinking about trying to prevent that from happening. And if that's wonky, we can talk about another time, but it's something I've been curious about.
No, I think that's very topical and a very good question again. Sorry, I will share this. So I am a first-gen college student. I'm a first-gen grad student. And I am super familiar with that. Like, yes, you need to be spending the equivalent of a full-time job applying to all of the scholarships. And if you don't have enough money for school, it's your fault. That kind of mentality, I think, apart from just being incredibly damaging and fundamentally classist, it worms its way in insidious ways. And I think that's why we really view the University of Michigan as bearing some responsibility, I think, for being the primary funder and not passing the buck to small community organizations or organizations that, don't have that funding. And also to not passing the buck to students. So it becomes another thing that you should be spending all of the time and energy you don't have on trying to find for yourself. And I think that's why viewing the university as the funder of first source, I apologize, I'm not using the correct term, but rather than asking field sites to pay what they can first and then having the university supplement that, I think to me, it's an important distinction.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's important to kind of note that, like, we're asking the university and the endowment first, and then if there's other things, I just get worried that if we say like, oh, but this field placement can pay, so this student's going to get paid this way and this student's going to get paid this way, it might start to feel like it might lead to people trying to get out of it in some way, including the university.
No, that's a really important point. And I think another important detail is that it would be self-determined by organizations. It wouldn't be, we need to see all your books and then we're going to make the determination. It wouldn't be like another audit that y'all have to go through. But I will also stop talking in case anyone else has thoughts on this. Matt.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Lindsay. And I think this does, your perspective does perhaps occasion some revising of how P4P explains our proposal. So I really appreciate the feedback. We have in our document Payment for Placements an overview, which is our more longer sort of exegesis on why P4P and the proposed payment plan. We have devised a system which we think would allow students and the School of Social Work to keep track of the different stipend options available to students. And it would, under our system, occasion every student reporting whether a stipend is going to be made available to them through the state, the School of Social Work's newly created Alumni Field Fund, or their field site. And then in the event that they report that they are not being paid a stipend by any of those means, that's when the endowment would automatically step in. And we devised this plan on our own, and we are absolutely welcome to any input in terms of how we could hypothetically make that plan more efficient and cover any gaps, as well as communicate that we P4P do want the endowment to be the default payer. So we would be happy to converse with you on that.
Thanks, y'all.
It looked like there was a hand from Joseph earlier.
Yes, I had a question. This might be a stupid question as well. It might be helpful also to see the policy around the endowment as far as kind of the ins and outs of it, what it stipulates as far as access to. If I'm understanding this correctly, then the endowment would be used in order to ultimately help the students to make schooling more affordable, as well as allowing and freeing up basically time for studying and self-care and so on, which is all absolutely super important. So why, I guess my question ultimately is, what would be the P4P seems like a middleman for the endowment then, as opposed to actually just accessing the endowment for assistance to pay directly for student aid.
I can take a stab at that, Cleo, if you'd like. Thank you. Yeah, so Parent for Placements, we are a student group. I don't even want to call us a student organization because we're not technically registered with the University of Michigan. And we view ourselves as an advocacy group. We are, right, to Lindsay's point, we are campaigning and advocating that various funds, especially unrestricted endowment funds, be made available to support students during their time in field. But we, under our plan, would not be any sort of like middleman figure that is taking money from the endowment and then dispersing it to students. Essentially, what we are hoping would happen is the provost of the university, who is ultimately the buck stops with them with decisions concerning the endowment, that they would authorize the creation of a new line item in the School of Social Work's budget, which would then, so the School of Social Work would be the distributor, not the payor, but just as the School of Social Work and all the other different departments of the university receive a yearly line item allocation from the school, we would want those funds to go straight to the school so that they can then be distributed to the students who need it. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so if I can just add that as well. Thank you, Matt. Matt is pretty good with details. My brain does not love details. But P4P is concerned with getting students paid. We have judged the unrestricted funds in the university's endowment to be the most likely means for getting students paid. But if the university were to decide that was the route, yes, P4P would not be in charge of dispersing those funds, and we wouldn't have access to those directly. We are just organizing around students getting paid. Yes, and I think Ari, yeah.
One last thing I can just also add, because I think this might be your question as well, is like, why are we not just putting this into scholarships directly, and instead asking for some kind of something somewhat similar to an income? And the reason for that specifically is because when we talk to students, and what's really stressing students out, it's not having a steady income or having to work 80 to 100 hours of school plus working to get a steady income for the cost of living. So it's not, a lot of scholarship funds go directly into students' tuition payment. So it's not quite a ongoing steady stream of money coming in. So that's kind of why we're more advocating for this instead of just directly increasing financial aid in that more, I guess, traditional sense.
Joseph, I don't know if you had more you wanted to say on that, or if others have questions.
No, nothing else. Just I was curious.
Yeah, thank you.
I do see one question in the chat that we might be able to answer quickly. So it was, have you all gauged U of M Regents' interest or strategy for how allies can support and advocate for this endowment strategy?
That is a great question. Yes, thank you for asking that. Allies and allies are definitely welcome to help advocate. We are always looking for folks to voice that they are in support of this and they are in support of students getting money. We have had some conversations with the regents. There's a little bit of a process that comes along with that. Some folks are more open to direct dialogue than others. Some folks prefer that you kind of go through the correct channel. So that is a work in progress as well. But also the more support that we have from field sites, the more support that we have from, we've been working with the school on the joint task force, and the more support that we have overall, the easier it is to approach the Board of Regents and make a request. I think reading your question again, apologies. Sorry, I'm not sure if someone's speaking. Is that my background noise or is there? Oh, that must have been me. Apologies. All right, go for it.
I think this is actually a great segue into action steps because I want to respect everyone's time. So there's a couple things we'd really appreciate field sites to either consider or discuss. Obviously one is just, checking out what Emergence Collective's doing and starting conversations at your organizations about what it might look like to give some financial assistance to students, just getting that conversation going and kind of seeing what your capacity is or is not as well. And then the other thing that we're asking right at this moment is we have been trying to solicit a meeting with the provost for 3 months now, I believe. We've emailed back and forth. And as we are concluding the joint task force on stipends, which is with the School of Social Work Administrators, where we have, created all these wonderful pathways to increasing funding, we think now is the right time to ask to meet with the provost. This is payment for placement specifically. So we actually have an open letter that we're going to be delivering on Tuesday. And we would really appreciate if you all would consider, discussing with your field sites and possibly, also adding your name to this petition, because we know that field sites have a lot of sway as well with the university administration and saying, please support local organizations. This is a public university. So that is one way that you can kind of plug in right now. And if you do want to, talk about different routes for paying students, you can always reach out to the Office of Field Education. I know Dan Fisher and Rachel Nasco are both at this meeting, and their emails are very open to, beginning this process as well. But those are that's the long and the short of what we're doing right now. Yeah, I can also share a timeline of what we've done so far, just in case people are curious. But I'll bring it back to you to close, Cleo.
Yes, I know we're going a little bit over and I apologize for that. I do want to be respectful of people's time. I am going to share the presentation slides in the meeting right now before y'all leave, just in case anybody wanted to review any of that data. We kind of went through it quickly. And I am also going to share the sign-in one last time. If folks could please fill that out. It will help us stay in touch with you. Other than that, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. We know that this is something that closely affects all of you, and we just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for coming with your really important questions. Thank you for holding us accountable. And thanks for the past hour.
As students, we really appreciate when field sites give us the opportunity to have these discussions. So thank you for not only allowing that for your students, but for showing up for this big one too. It means a lot.
And special thank you to Emergence Collective as well. Again, thank you both for being here.
Happy Thursday.
See y'all. Nicely done.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Stay cool.
You too.
Thanks.
Overall cool.
Good job, everybody.
I am going to